It was around 1 o'clock in the night, and in pitch dark, Air Transit Flight 236 was going from Toronto to Lebanon over the Atlantic Ocean. More than 4 hours had passed since it took off. Until then, everything was normal in the plane. But then suddenly a warning came in front of the pilot in the cockpit. A hair-raising warning. This warning was in the plane. The fuel of Flight 236 had run out in the middle of the ocean at a height of 49 feet in the air. The pilots were shocked because they were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and there was no trace of land anywhere. That means now the pilots had only one option, and that was to die along with the 293 passengers sitting in the plane. To die by drowning in the deep waters of the Atlantic, which was almost certain. But then during this time something happened with this plane which was surprising. What had happened to Air Transit Flight 236 in the middle of the ocean at a height of 49 feet in the air? Let's know. This story begins from Toronto Pius Airport on August 23, 21 at 8:52 p.m. local time. Airbus A330 of Air Transit Airline from Toronto in Canada to Lisbon in Portugal. This was a 7-hour-long non-stop flight in which there were 293 passengers, 2 pilots and 13 crew members. Before taking off, approximately 46.9 metric tons of fuel was filled in the plane, which was only 4 tons more than the required amount. The plane was being flown by 16-year-old Captain Robert P.J. and 28-year-old First Officer Duck Dagger. Captain P.J. had approximately 1,600 hours of plane experience, out of which he had spent 796 hours in Airbus A330 itself. First Officer Dagger had approximately 100 hours of flight experience, out of which 386 hours were in Airbus A330. Which meant that both these pilots were very experienced. After boarding of the passengers, the plane takes off at 8:52 local time, and in just a few minutes it reaches an altitude of 49 feet in the air, which was its cruising altitude. After this, the plane was about to cross the Atlantic and land in Leyte. At the time of takeoff, everything was normal in the plane. Most of the passengers were sleeping, and the crew members and pilots also did not have any special work. More than 4 hours had passed since the plane took off, and it was now in the middle of the Atlantic when at 1:03 in the night, Captain Robert notices an unusual reading in the rear cockpit. In a short while, an error also starts showing. This error was of high oil pressure, low oil quantity, and low oil temperature. Now, in such long non-stop flights, it was common to get such minor errors, and the pilots themselves, or with the help of the crew, sitting in the cockpit, correct them. But the error that was seen in this air transit flight was not normal. Despite having so much experience of Airbus A330, both the captain and the first officer had never seen such an error before in their entire career. That's why they opened the flight manual and tried to find out more about it. But there was nothing about it even in the flight manual. Now if the pilot wanted, he could have ignored this error. But it is obvious that when you are in the middle of the ocean, you would not want to take any kind of risk. That's why Captain Pish called Air Transit to know more about this matter. The Maintenance Control Center asked for help. But the surprising thing was that even the maintenance team of this plane did not know anything about this error. The maintenance team advised the pilots to keep an eye on this and inform immediately as soon as they come to know about something. Time had passed since this incident, and the pilots had now relaxed, believing that this might have happened due to a faulty sensor, which was a normal thing. But exactly half an hour after this incident, at 1:36 in the night, the pilots saw another warning. This warning was a fuel imbalance. Actually, in every plane, the fuel is equally divided between the 2 wings. But sometimes the fuel in one wing goes up and down. That is why the warning of imbalance starts being heard in the cockpit. But this was a problem that the pilots could fix while sitting in the cockpit. Potts did exactly the same. There was less fuel in the right wing of the plane, so he transferred fuel from the left wing to the right wing, and somehow he got rid of this problem as well. But these 2 pilots did not know that during this time they had done something that was going to be a threat to their lives. After this fuel transfer, a problem occurred which gave goosebumps to the pilots. Actually, after this fuel transfer, the oil temperature in the plane's engine number 2 started falling and the oil pressure increased. Now the pilots became serious after understanding the seriousness of the matter. these people were in the center of the Atlantic Ocean and there was no land in sight. The nearest airport was Lodge Air Base on Portugal's Ilhas Island. The pilots immediately contacted the airport authority and asked for emergency landing permission. They got the landing permission and they also directed the plane towards it. But during this time the captain came to know that with every passing second, 1 gun of fuel was getting reduced in the plane and now they had only 60 tons of fuel left. According to this, now they could fly for only half an hour more and Ljesch Airport was now 280 kilometers away from the airport. That means they did not even have the fuel to reach Ljesch. But still they try to reach Ljesch somehow. But the situation worsened when at 2:13 a.m. the engine number 2 of the right wing of the plane caught fire. The pilots were stunned. Now only 1 engine was left in the plane and that too had very little fuel. But whatever happened, the reality was that that 1 engine was the last fuel of the plane. To bring the plane on 1 engine, the captain brought it back from an altitude of 49 feet to 33 feet. The fuel was still depleting rapidly. The pilots felt that there was some leakage. So they also tried to find this leakage. But due to darkness they could not find it. Meanwhile, the maintenance unit of the plane contacted them and suggested them to bring the plane down from an altitude of 33 feet to 20 feet so that if there was any leakage, it could also be detected. But the pilots could not take such a risk because even if the plane had come down so low and the leakage was confirmed, they would still not have been able to reach this height and they would have been forced to land in the sea, and if there was even a slight upheaval during this landing, the entire plane would have sunk into the sea. That is why the pilots do not listen to the maintenance unit and without taking any kind of risk remain at an altitude of 33 feet. Pilots still have hope. It was believed that they could land safely on a large airbase even with just 1 engine. Therefore, the airport authority had made full preparations on the runway to avoid any kind of risk at the time of landing. The plane was now slowly moving towards the airport. But during this time, 10 minutes after the plane's engine number 2 caught fire, the plane's engine number 1 also caught fire, and with this it was also confirmed that there was leakage somewhere in the plane. But now this did not matter because both the engines had stopped. As soon as the engine stopped, the electricity supply of the entire plane also stopped. However, with the help of the air turbine, there was still enough electricity in the cockpit to run the equipment. At around 2:30 in the night, the oxygen masks came down in the passenger cabin and there was panic among all the passengers. By this time the plane had reached an altitude of 30 feet and now it started gliding. By this plane gliding, we mean that when any plane covers a vertical distance, it also covers a horizontal distance in the same proportion. And every plane has its own glide ratio. And the glide ratio of Airbus A330 was 15:1, which means that this plane goes forward by 1 foot and descends by 1 foot every 15 feet. And now the distance between Lodge's airport and the plane was also 121 kilometers, which could be covered by gliding. But during this time, the pilots faced another problem. While gliding, this plane had reached so close to the island that now only 15 kilometers were left between it and the island, and the problem was that the plane was still at an altitude of 20 feet, and if the pilot tried to land the plane from such a height, then there was a high possibility of the plane crashing. Therefore, the pilots contact the air traffic control. ATC advises the pilot to perform a 360 degree before landing. Both the pilots do exactly the same and make the plane go in a circular circle, i.e. 360 degree, due to which the altitude of the plane falls from 20 feet to 5 feet. But this altitude was also not safe for landing. Therefore, the pilots perform several S-turns with the plane, which brings the plane to an altitude of 2 feet, and this was the perfect altitude for the plane to land. Now both the pilots bring the plane to the airbase runway. But this landing was also not free from danger. As soon as the L was done, 8 out of 12 wheels of the plane got completely locked and the speed of the plane was also 370 kilometers per hour. Due to such high speed, the plane bounces as soon as it touches the runway and then lands on the runway. After moving for about 200 to 300 meters, the brakes of the plane are applied and the plane lands. By this time most of the tires of the plane were broken, but due to the alertness of the airport crew, an accident was averted. there was chaos in the plane during landing, due to which about 14 passengers and 2 crew members got minor injuries, but no one was harmed. This Flight 236 of Air Transit Airline later became the first plane in the history to glide without an engine for the world's longest distance of 121 kilometers, hence it is also called a glider. After the incident, the Portuguese Aviation Investigation Department GPIAA investigated it and found out that the maintenance worker had installed a wrong part in the hydraulic system of the plane, due to which the part broke down shortly after and fuel leakage started in the plane, due to which both the engines of the plane burned. Air Transit was also to be blamed for this incident. Therefore, the Canadian government imposed a fine of about 2.5 lakh Canadian dollars on the company, and Airbus also made changes in all its planes later on so that such a problem is not faced again.